Benny's lawyer said my name, not Benny, his lawyer, in open court, with a judge present and a stenographer recording, and Selena sitting at the table across the aisle and Hailey 3 rows behind me in the public gallery. He said my name, and he said something after it that I had not known anyone knew, something that belonged to a moment I had thought was private, something that had existed, as far as I understood, between me and Selena and no one else. And Hailey heard it. I did not turn around. I could not turn around. I was sitting in that witness chair, and the lawyer was looking at me, and the courtroom was completely silent, and turning around to look at my wife in that moment would have confirmed something I needed the next few seconds to figure out how to address. So I looked at the lawyer, and I answered his question, and the stenographer typed, and the judge made a note. And somewhere in the row behind me, Hailey was sitting with information she had just received in the worst possible way. That was 6 weeks ago. And I have been trying to find the words to explain it ever since. Subscribe right now, because what happened after I stepped down from that witness stand and walked toward the exit, and Hailey was standing in the corridor waiting, is the conversation that changed everything. I thought I understood about what we were. I'm Justin. And the courtroom was not where any of this was supposed to come out. And yet it did. And what Benny's lawyer knew and how they knew it is the part of this story that is still keeping me up at night. Let me take you back to how I ended up in that witness chair, because it did not start with a subpoena. It started 4 months earlier with a conversation I had with Selena that I should have told Hailey about and didn't. Selena had asked me to be a character witness, not immediately, not the first time she called me after she and Benny separated. That first call was just the call it appeared to be. Someone I had known for most of my life telling me that something in her life had broken down and that she was going to need to move through a legal process and that she was scared. I listened. I said I was sorry. I said I was there if she needed anything. The request came 3 weeks later. She said, I know this is a lot to ask. She said, I know what it puts you in. She said, I need someone who knew me before all of this, someone who can speak to who I am rather than who the divorce proceedings are trying to make me look like. She said, you don't have to say yes, Bradum. I said I would think about it. I thought about it for 4 days. I ran through every version of what it would mean. The exposure of being connected publicly to a divorce proceeding. The specific way it would look, regardless of the actual content of any testimony. The conversation I would need to have with Hailey before agreeing to anything. I thought about that last one most. The conversation with Hailey. What I would say and how I would say it and what she would need from me before she could hear it without the kind of fear that fills in the spaces between incomplete information. And then I called Selena back and said yes without having that conversation first. I told myself I would tell Hailey after I had said yes and the logistics were more concrete and there was something specific to explain rather than something hypothetical to navigate. I told myself that telling her before would mean asking her to worry about something that might not happen the way I was imagining. I told myself I was protecting her from unnecessary anxiety. I was protecting myself from an uncomfortable conversation. The deposition happened before the trial in a conference room with lawyers on both sides and a court reporter and none of the drama of an actual courtroom. I answered questions for 2 hours. Most of it was straightforward. Some of it required more care. At one point, Benny's lawyer asked me something that I answered in a way that I believe was honest and that I believe was appropriate given the context. I did not tell Hailey about the deposition. I know. By the time the trial date was set and my name appeared on the witness list, the decision about whether to tell her had been made by the calendar. She saw my name in a news report before I had said anything. She came and found me that evening and she held up her phone and she said, is this true? I said, yes. She said, when were you going to tell me? I said, I was trying to find the right moment. She said, Justin. She said it in the specific way that contains everything she could say and chooses not to. I said, I know. She said, we're not doing this again. She said it quietly, not as a threat, as a statement of something she had decided. She said, I need you to understand that we are not doing this again. Not the hiding and the protecting yourself from the conversation in the right moment that never comes. She said, I need it to stop. I said, I know. I said, you're right. I said, I'm sorry. She said, don't apologize, change. We talked for a long time that night about the deposition and why I had agreed to testify and what I had said and what the trial was going to look like. She asked questions and I answered them and she listened. And by the end of the conversation, she understood the full picture. in a way she should have understood from the beginning. She said, I would have been okay with this. She said, if you had told me when she first asked, I would have been okay with it. She said, I understand why you said yes. I understand what she needed and why you're one of the people who could give it to her. She said, the thing I can't be okay with is finding out from a news report. I said, I know. She said, okay. She said, then we go to the trial and you testify and we deal with whatever comes from it together. I said, okay. The trial was on a Tuesday. Hailey came with me. She sat in the public gallery 3 rows back, which she had chosen deliberately, not beside me because I was a witness and the logistics of that didn't allow it, but present, visible. The specific statement of presence that says, I am here and I know what this is and I am not going anywhere. Comment below right now because I want to know what you would have done if you were Hailey. Your husband is testifying in his ex's divorce proceeding and you found out from a news report. Do you go with him to the trial? Do you stay home? Do you make him face it alone? Tell me where you're watching from because what Hailey chose to do says everything about who she is, and I want to know if you would have made the same choice. My testimony was straightforward for the first 40 minutes, character and credibility questions, the kind of testimony that exists to establish a person as a full human being rather than the one-dimensional figure that legal proceedings can reduce people to. I answered everything honestly and carefully. And then Benny's lawyer stood up for cross-examination. He was methodical. He started at the edges of things and worked toward the center. Questions about the nature of my relationship with Selena, questions about the frequency of contact, questions about specific occasions and what had happened during them, standard cross-examination territory, the kind designed to establish closeness in order to suggest bias. I answered everything straightforwardly. There was nothing in any of it that I was not comfortable saying under oath. And then he asked a question that contained my name and a date and a location and a description of something that I had not expected anyone outside of 2 people to know about. The room went quiet in a specific way, not because the question itself was dramatic, because of what it implied about what Benny's team knew and how they knew it. I answered truthfully. The answer was not damaging in any legal sense, but the question, the specific information it revealed, told me something about what Benny had been doing, about how he had been building a picture about what he had collected and from whom. I stepped down from the witness stand 40 minutes later. I walked through the courtroom. I pushed through the door into the corridor. Hailey was already there. She had come out before me. She was standing against the wall across from the courtroom door with her arms crossed and her face in that specific configuration that tells me she has been processing something and is not finished yet. I walked toward her. She said, "What was that?" I said, "I don't know how they knew that." She said, "What was it?" She said, "Explain it to me." And I did. Standing in a courthouse corridor with people walking past and the sounds of other proceedings leaking through other doors, I explained the thing that Benny's lawyer had put into the record, the date and the location and what had happened there and why it was something that only 2 people should have known about. She listened. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Benny knew." I said, "Someone told him. Or he found out some other way. I don't know how." She said, "Selena knew you were going to testify." I said, "Yes." She said, "And Benny knew Selena knew." I said, "Yes." She said, "So he had months to prepare something to use." I said, "That's what I think." She was quiet again. Then she said, "This is what I was trying to tell you." She said, "This is why the hiding costs more than the telling." She said, "When you keep things from me, there are gaps. And gaps are where things like this come from." She said, "If I had known everything from the beginning, there would have been no gap for him to find." She was right. She has been right about this specific thing more times than I have been willing to acknowledge. And she was right again in that corridor, and I had no response that was adequate. I said, "I know." She said, "We need to talk to Selena." I said, "Yes." She said, "Today, before anyone else has a chance to shape what happened in there into something it wasn't." We called Selena from the car. The call lasted almost 2 hours. Selena told us what she knew about how Benny had found out what he had found out. And what she told us changed the shape of everything I thought I understood about the previous 6 months. Because the way Benny had known was not what I expected. It was not someone who had talked. It was not a leak or a coincidence or a careful observation. It was something more deliberate and more invasive than any of those things. And what Hailey said when she heard it is the beginning of part 2, because Hailey's response was not anger, it was not fear, it was something I had not seen from her before, something that told me she had been thinking about this specific possibility for longer than I had realized. And what she decided to do about it is the most surprising thing she has ever done. Subscribe right now, press that bell, because part 2 starts with Hailey's decision, and it is the last thing Benny expected from anyone in that car. Stay with me. I want to go back to the moment the lawyer said my name, because I have been replaying it constantly, and I think there are things about it that matter for understanding everything that came after. When he said my name, it was in the middle of a sentence, not emphasized, not dramatic, just included the way you include a proper noun in a factual statement. The specific flatness of it is what made it land the way it did. A dramatic delivery would have been easier to dismiss. The flatness said, this is information we have verified and we are presenting it as fact. I heard the sentence. I processed it. I understood immediately what it referred to, and I understood immediately that the information in it should not have been available to anyone in that room except me and Selena. And in the second between hearing it and answering it, I did something I have never done in a high-pressure situation before. I stopped, not visibly, not in a way anyone in the room could have seen, but internally I stopped and I made a choice about what kind of person I was going to be in the next 30 seconds. I could have been evasive. I could have answered in a way that was technically true but strategically constructed. I could have performed not understanding the question in order to buy time. These options were available to me, and in a different version of myself, I might have taken one of them. Instead, I answered directly. The answer was true, and it was the full answer, and it did not construct anything around the truth to make it more comfortable. It was just the thing that happened, said plainly. Hailey heard it from 3 rows back. I thought about her in those 30 seconds. Not primarily. The question and the answer required my full attention, but underneath the attention, there was an awareness of her presence behind me, of what she was receiving in real time from a source she had no ability to contextualize or prepare for. That awareness is something I carry now in a way I did not carry it before that courtroom. The awareness of how information lands on the people who love you when it arrives without context, without the framing you would have given it, without the before and after that makes a fact understandable rather than alarming. She deserved the before and after. I had not given it to her, and a lawyer in a courtroom had given her the stripped fact instead. In the corridor, she did not perform being okay. She asked me directly what the question had referred to, and I told her directly, and she received it in the specific way she receives things when she has decided to understand rather than react. She asks the questions that get to the center of it. She does not orbit the painful parts. She goes to them. This is one of the things I love about her that I have sometimes been afraid of. Her directness, her willingness to go to the center of the painful thing. It requires the same directness from me, and I have not always been capable of giving it. In the corridor, I gave it, not perfectly, but more than I have before. On the call with Selena that afternoon, driving away from the courthouse, Hailey was the one who asked the question that unlocked everything. She said, "Selena, how long has Benny known about what his lawyer referenced today?" Selena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Longer than I thought." She said, "That's part of what I found out last week." She said, "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you." Hailey said, "Tell us now." And Selena told us. What she told us was not about the specific thing the lawyer had said. It was larger than that. It was about how Benny had been operating for the past 8 months, about what he had been doing to collect information and what tools he had been using and who had been helping him, and why the courtroom today was not an improvisation. It was the end of a very long and very deliberate process. When Selena finished, Hailey was quiet. Then she said, "Okay." She said it in the way she says okay when she has received something large and is sorting it into its proper place before she responds to it. She said, "I need to think about this for a day." She said, "Justin and I need to talk tonight, and then I need to think." She said, "And then I need to tell you what I've decided." Selena said, "Okay." Hailey said, "Whatever I decide, I want you to know something first." She said, "What happened today in that courtroom was not your fault." She said, "You did not ask for any of what Benny has been doing, and you are not responsible for how it has affected the people around you." She said, "I want you to know that before I say anything else." The silence on the other end of the line was the kind of silence that happens when someone receives something they needed and did not expect to receive. Then Selena said, "Thank you." Hailey said, "I'll call you tomorrow." We drove home. The city moved past the windows. The courthouse was behind us, and the call was over. And whatever was going to happen next had not started yet. In that suspended space between the ending and the beginning of something, Hailey reached over and took my hand on the center console. She held it for the rest of the drive. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The hand was what she had to say. That evening, we talked for a long time about the 8 months and what Selena had told us and what it meant and what our options were, about the things I had kept from her and why and what it had cost, about the version of honesty she needed from me and the version I had been capable of giving and the distance between those two things that I was still trying to close. At some point, she said, "I'm not angry about the courtroom." I said, "You have every right to be." She said, "I know." She said, "I'm choosing not to be." She said, "Anger at you about this particular thing doesn't serve either of us right now. And what serves us is figuring out what to do next." I said, "What do you want to do?" She said, "I told Selena I needed to think." She said, "I've been thinking since she told us about what Benny has been doing, and I know what I want to do." She said, "But I need to know if you're with me before I say it." I said, "I'm with you." She said, "You don't know what I'm going to say yet." I said, "It doesn't matter. I'm with you." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said what she had decided. And it was the last thing I expected. It was the last thing Benny expected. And it was the most extraordinary thing anyone has ever decided in the middle of a situation they did not choose to be in. Part 2 starts with what Hailey decided, with the call she made the next morning. And with what happened in the 3 weeks after that call that none of us, not me, not Selena, not Benny, had planned for. Subscribe right now, press the bell, because part 2 is where Hailey takes the center of this story, and where she takes it is somewhere I could not have imagined when I was sitting in that witness chair. Stay with me. There is something I want to say about what it felt like to sit in that witness chair, not the legal part, the human part. I have performed in front of enormous crowds. I have been in rooms where the attention of thousands of people was directed at me simultaneously. I have given interviews that went in unexpected directions and navigated them in real time. I have been, for most of my adult life, someone who is looked at. The witness chair was different. It was not the size of the attention. It was the quality of it. In a courtroom, the attention is not admiration or curiosity or entertainment. It is evaluation. The specific attention of a room full of people whose job it is to assess the truthfulness of what you are saying as you are saying it. The judge, the lawyers, the stenographer, Selena's team, Benny's team, and 3 rows back, Hailey. I was aware of all of them, but I was most aware of her. Not in a way that affected my answers. The answers were what they were, and I gave them honestly, regardless of who was listening. But underneath the giving of the answers, there was a continuous awareness of what she was receiving, of what the room looked like from her angle, of what it cost her to be sitting there 3 rows back, receiving information about my life that she had not been given in advance. She had come anyway. She had known it might be uncomfortable, and she had come. That choice, the specific choice to show up for something that was going to require something of her, is the thing I come back to most when I think about that day. Not the lawyer's question, not my answer. Hailey, 3 rows back, choosing to be there. The conversation we had that evening covered a lot of ground about Benny and what he had been doing in the 8 months and what Selena had told us, but it also covered something more personal, something about the pattern that the day had been part of, the specific recurring shape of me choosing not to tell her things and then being exposed in a context that was worse than anything the telling would have produced. She said, "I've been thinking about this for a while." She said, "I've been trying to understand why it keeps happening." Not as an accusation, just to understand. I said, "I've been trying to understand the same thing." She said, "I think I know part of it." She said, "I think you don't tell me things because telling me makes them real in a different way." She said, "When something is only in your head, it still has the quality of something you might be able to manage. The moment you tell me, it becomes something we have to navigate together, and you lose the control of managing it alone." I sat with that. She said, "That's not a criticism." She said, "I understand why that feels safer." She said, "But it isn't safer. It just moves the danger to a different place." I said, The courthouse, she said the courthouse, and before that, the kitchen table with the photos, and before that, the nightstand note. She said it keeps showing up in the wrong place because you keep not putting it in the right place being her. I said, I know. She said, I need you to practice, not promise. Practice, she said, promises I have heard. I need to see the practice. I said, okay. She said, starting tomorrow. I said, starting now. I said, there are two things I haven't told you that I should have told you a long time ago, and I want to tell you now, not tomorrow, now. She looked at me. I told her both things that had been sitting in the quiet place where I put things I wasn't ready to address. Small things, not dramatic, not the kind of things that change the shape of a relationship, but things that belonged to her and that I had been keeping without justification. She listened. When I finished, she said, thank you, just that. And then she said, see, that's the practice. What Hailey decided the next morning, the call she made, the thing that happened in the 3 weeks after, none of it is simple. All of it required more from everyone in this story than any of us had budgeted for. And the outcome of it is something I am still inside, still living, still trying to understand the full shape of. But I can tell you this, whatever comes next, the practice has started. The conversation is happening in the right place instead of the wrong one. Not perfectly, not without setbacks, but happening. And Hailey is in it with me, which is the only thing that matters. Part 2 is her decision and what it required of Selena and what it did to Benny when he found out that the three of us had decided to face it together rather than separately. Subscribe, press the bell. I'll see you in part 2. Stay with me. One more thing. About Selena in that courtroom, she was sitting at the plaintiff's table when I walked in. I could see her from the witness area, but I could not speak to her. The protocols of a courtroom do not allow for that. She was with her legal team and I was with mine, and the space between us was formal and managed and nothing like any of the spaces we have occupied together over the years. But at one point, during the proceedings before I was called to the stand, she turned and looked back toward the gallery, not scanning the room, looking for something specific. She found Hailey first, and something passed between them in that look, some acknowledgement, some communication that did not require words or gesture, just the specific recognition of two people who have been through something together and who see each other across a formal room and know exactly what the other one is carrying. Then she found me. She held my gaze for a moment. The look she has when she is trying to say something she cannot say out loud. I do not always know what she is saying in those looks, but this one I understood. She was saying thank you for being there, for having said yes, for the note on the nightstand that I should not have written and the things I should have said that I hadn't, and all of it, for showing up anyway, despite the mess of how I had gotten there. I nodded, very slightly. She turned back to her team. The proceedings continued, and I sat there thinking about what it means to show up. Not perfectly, not cleanly, not without having made a series of decisions that I would make differently if I had them to make again, just showing up, being present in the room where the thing is happening, even when the path that got you there was not the path you would have chosen. Hailey showed up 3 rows back, having found out from a news report, having had the conversation in the car and the corridor, and then another one that evening, having been asked to process in real time information she should have been given months before. She showed up. That is what I am trying to learn from both of them. The specific practice of showing up for the thing, even when the thing is difficult, even when you did not prepare for it correctly, even when someone is watching from 3 rows back, having found out in the worst way. You show up, and then you have the conversation in the right place, not the kitchen table with the photos, not the courthouse corridor, not the note on the nightstand, in the right place, which is wherever the person who loves you is, as soon as possible with the full truth. I am practicing. It is not natural yet. It is not easy, but it is happening. Part 2 is what Hailey decided, what she did, what it cost, and what it produced, and what Benny did when he realized that the 3 of us were not going to handle it separately. Subscribe, bell icon, right now. Part 2 is the most important part of this story. Stay with me. For anyone watching this who has ever been 3 rows back in a room where something was happening that involved them but that they had not been prepared for For anyone who has ever received information in the worst possible way and had to decide in real time what kind of person they were going to be about it, you showed up. That is not nothing. That is everything. Subscribe. Press the bell. Part 2 is coming. Stay with me. And for Hailey, who showed up 3 rows back, who held my hand on the center console all the way home, who said starting now instead of accepting starting tomorrow, who decided something the next morning that I am still in awe of. I see you. I am trying to be worthy of you. Every day, starting now. Subscribe. Stay with me.